I'm staying here. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to stay right here. And somebody better bring me some new note cards. Ah, there you have it.
I got you, Chris.
Oh, Anna Sugg, ladies and gentlemen, the great Anna Sugg.
Now joining Chris Stirewalt on stage, please welcome Congressman Jim Himes, a Democrat representing Connecticut and ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on
That's a good one.
Intelligence.
Hey, that's a real good one. Good to see you. Good to see you. Have a seat. Well, aren't you all lucky?
Where's my walk-on music?
I know. What would your walk-up music be if you had to choose walk-up?
YMCA, of course.
He may be kidding. He may be kidding. We're going to look into it. Here are things that you should know about Congressman Jim Himes, other than that he obviously has a sense of humor. He represents the Connecticut 4th, the fighting 4th. He's been there since 2009. He's the ranking Democrat on Intel. He's also on financial services. Oh, you just had a birthday. You just turned 59. You're 59.
Sometimes what is left unsaid.
No, you look at. I tell people I'm not 49. I'm 59, so that they say you look pretty good for 59, like medium. He's a Harvard man, a Rhodes Scholar, studied Latin America before he spent 12 years, Goldman Sachs. Fooled around a little bit, local government, tried that out for a while, but 2009 took the leap to go to the House. And we are very grateful that you are here. Okay, voting today, there's action today. And you're definitely not a finance bro, you're a finance man. You're a finance adult person. But you've been a big part of the discussion around what to do about cryptocurrency and how to manage that. Now, the way I understand it, you're a yes on bank-style regulations for what's called stablecoin, which is pegged cryptocurrency. It's just a digital version. It's pegged to the dollar. It's a digital version. And you're a yes on setting up a kind of FDIC structure for that stuff, but you're a no on a regulatory package on the investment side of this part. So there's the Genius Act, which is for this dollar-pegged stuff. This is like the banking-style regulation. And then there's the Clarity Act, which is the Wall Street kind of regulation stuff. Why are you for one and not the other?
Yeah. So you got it right. There's 3 bills. One is pretty easy. So, the stablecoin, the Genius Act, which has come over from the Senate, which is, by the way, why your conference was probably disrupted, because we had a 45-minute kerfuffle on the floor about accepting something yet again from the Senate without the ability to amend it in the House. You could talk to the Freedom Caucus guys about that. But anyway, stablecoin is pretty straightforward, right? Jim's stablecoin. So long as if I say Jim's stablecoin is worth $1, I've got $1 in a bank account somewhere in reserve. Okay, limited room for mischief, not zero room, right? That looks an awful lot like a money market mutual fund. We had a little unpleasantness with the money market mutual funds back in 2009. It was but anyway, it's a pretty straightforward instrument. When you start talking about things like digital commodities, which is the subject of the Clarity Act, this gets pretty exotic. This is not, I'm telling you this is worth $1 and there's $1 underneath it. This is, I'm going to promise you a decentralized token, and it's going to be on a decentralized blockchain in 10 years. It will be programmable to pay for your music consumption and your food, and it will also vote for you or something. Yeah. I don't know. Some of this stuff is pretty fantastical, and you do have questions about, is this a security? Is it a commodity? What exactly is it? The Clarity Bill, as Fit 21, some of you will remember Fit 21, is an okay attempt to try to divide jurisdictional authority between the CFTC and the SEC. It's got a whole bunch of problems, but anyway, and here's what I report sadly. I was a yes on Fit 21. French Hill is one of my closest friends in the House. Yeah. I desperately wanted to be a yes on Clarity, even though I think it's got lots of problems. Between Fit 21 and Clarity, you get the issuance by a sitting president of a Trump coin and the revenue of some $400 million while he's president. Oh, by the way, we have Melania coin. And so that really poisoned the atmosphere. So I made the wildly outrageous act. French, my good friend, let's at least put some verbiage in this bill that says that the president and the vice president, and by the way, the rest of us, aren't going to issue digital commodities. Yeah. In the context of the disgustingness that we saw with the meme coins, that's not a terribly big ask. But the answer was no. And so, sadly, I won't be happy about it, but I'll be voting no on Clarity.
The Senate decided, though, that half a loaf was enough of a loaf, right? That if they could get the increased regulation and bring that clarity, if I guess that's why they name these things, to the process, that it was worth having, even if it didn't have the safeguards against corruption that you wanted. You disagree.
Well, no.
You don't want to have.
So that's not what happened. So
Okay,
the Genius Bill, which we're voting on, I think this afternoon, is about stablecoins.
Right.
And I talked to Ruben and the Yes geniuses, and they said, no, look, it's a stablecoin, right? It's a dollar if we say it's a dollar. We don't feel like we need the same conflicts language that you would need for some weird digital commodity.
Right. I mean, on the Clarity Act.
So they've not taken up any market structure bill. That's an interesting question. By the way, the crypto bros, and we can talk about what's good or bad in that world, but they're going to get a big win with the passage of the Genius Bill, and I think that's good. Like, let's check out these stable coins. I think that's a good thing. So they should be happy that they're going to get law made around stable coins. This market structure stuff is really complicated. The Senate hasn't even started, and my understanding is that they're not going to. Now, I think French wanted a big Democratic vote on clarity in order to maybe push the Senate to take up some bill. But again, we've got this glitch around the corruption that is going to make that Democratic vote smaller.
The holdup today was around the fact that there were conservatives in the House who said, we don't want there to ever be a reserve currency, right? We don't want the Federal Reserve to ever have a digital reserve currency or anything like that. They wanted exclusionary language. I understand about the practical procedure here that it's not, I assume in your mind, not worth taking up at this time to talk about from a legislative standpoint. But as an idea, when you think about the possibility of the federal government, whether it's through our central bank or whether it's through some other entity, having a digital currency? Yeah,
great question, and I can be pretty clear on this. Look, the bill that is likely to pass today, I hope it doesn't, but it's an Emmer bill that it's called the Anti-Big Brother Surveillance Act. It's a dumbass bill, and it forbids
so
the
you're
federal...
a no on that one.
And this is just one of these things where you sort of can't believe you have to make this argument. It is an article of MAGA faith that if there is a central bank digital currency, which basically, by the way, we sort of have central bank digital. How often are you using, greenbacks today? Right now, that's intermediated by a bank, but it's sort of an article of MAGA faith that the Federal Reserve is going to look at how you're spending your dollars. Well, guess what, my friend? The U.S. authorities can already look at how you're spending all your dollars with so it's like no technical difference. But the bill says we're not even going to investigate. We're not even going to do research into whether a CBDC makes sense. I don't know what the answer is. By the way, I wrote a white paper on this years ago. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. What I do know is that with England and Great Britain and China and Germany and everybody else looking into it and thinking about it, we ought to not just put our head in the sand and say, we're not even going to think about it. Pick your metaphor, but what if in 1945 we'd said, ooh, atomic power, that's really scary. We're going to forbid any research into atomic power. That's what we're doing here. It's just a dumbass thing to do.
Are you guys noticing a theme, a motif in the congressman's remarks? The idea of what the Federal Reserve is and whether or not the president can fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, how that all works. So we had a whole little news cycle today where the president, some of your Republican colleagues reported out and said, the president's getting ready to fire Jerome Powell. And then the president came out later and said, no, I was just talking, I wasn't doing. Can the president fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, number one? And number two, I assume you say no. And if he does, what do you do?
Yeah, look, it's not a debatable point. The law is super clear. The president can't fire the chairman or the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve but for cause.
Right.
Now, why do you think we're hearing about some apparent, overruns? Ever heard of a federal government agency doing an overrun on a renovation? They're laying the predicate, right, to do this. And so the answer to your question is pretty straightforward. You can look up the law. The terrifying thing is, how many more torpedoes in the hull of sort of what we've always relied on as the cornerstone of a capitalist system can our capitalist system take? It was always an article of faith of me, Economics 101, that tariffs, and by the way, tariffs chaotically imposed would be devastating for the economy. Well, the stock market's hitting new highs, right? And it is an article of faith of mine that if that if the president fires the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the service of compromising the independence of the monetary authority, that's going to be devastating. But I got to tell you, I'm revisiting my priors, because apparently you can impose totally chaotic tariffs, come back on them, create a lot of uncertainty. You can start a war in the Middle East and the stock market loves it. Not exactly what I thought the reaction would be. So I don't know. Maybe he'll fire Chairman Powell and the market will rally another 1,000 points. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. Or maybe not.
You saw the survey work in the Wall Street Journal today, basically where you are starting to see some of those things bite in. You're starting to see we're having a debate again about what is inflation, and I think when the normal understanding of inflation for non-monetary policy experts is that stuff costs more, and your dollar doesn't go as far. And so we are starting to have this conversation about the upward pressure on prices, both from immigration, the removal of immigrant workers, and also from now we're just getting to the tariff cost point. The consequences phase, Democrats have been waiting for the consequences phase, as you say, like, well, you can't do this stuff, you can't do this stuff. Do you think we may be there now? Do you think, based on what we see in economic reports, that we might be getting there, or we don't know?
You probably sensed in my last answer a little bit of, insecurity about things that I always knew to be true. I mean, again, anybody who's taken a basic economics course knows that a tariff is actually a tax on a product that will be paid by somebody, and it's not the country that's exporting. And so, look, at the end of the day, despite my making somewhat light of it earlier, I do think that we are, in the next couple of months, going to start to experience inflation associated with those tariffs. I just don't see how not. Now, I made light of war in the Middle East, never a good idea. I guess I'm making the point that this president is a very, very lucky man. And we may wake up 6 months from now and discover that the Iranians have decided that negotiation is fruitless. They gathered up whatever was left and they built themselves a device. So I do think that reality has a way of reasserting itself, but it is remarkable the extent to which reality has not asserted itself in the last 6 months.
So one of the ways in which reality has changed is Donald Trump loves NATO and NATO loves Donald Trump. This is not what I expected that I would see, right? He went over and he said something amazing. He said, these people aren't trying to screw us over. These people love their countries, and it's great. And they had this whole Trump-NATO bromance moment that happened. And now the president is going to ship U.S. weapon systems through NATO in support of Ukraine. Talk about, it's sort of a mixed bag from the president on Ukraine this week. On the one hand, he gives Russia 50 days before new economic penalties come in, but he is opening up the pipeline for weapons. You've been a passionate supporter for arming Ukraine and helping their resistance against the Russian invasion. What do you make of what you saw this week?
I'm probably not the right person to psychoanalyze the president. I haven't spent a lot of time in his company. But, look, it's clear to me that the Secretary General, as embarrassing as it might have been for all of us to watch by calling him Big Daddy or whatever he called him, and, Donald, this will be your massive... It's pretty clear that global leaders have figured out how to work this guy. And it's pretty clear that Putin pissed him off. And look, I can sometimes sound more disparaging than I mean to sound. It's very clear that Donald Trump lives for Donald Trump and to win. And Putin was standing in the way of him winning. Not that campaign promises are ever much of a thing, but, when he doesn't end the Ukraine-Russia war on day one, I suspect that nags a little bit. And, I think that the president probably understands that he's been played by Vladimir Putin. And so he's coming around. I celebrate that. I really do. It's an anxious base on which to build a foreign policy, but it's better than where I think. Look, when the president is casting doubt amongst European allies about whether we would abide by Article 5 commitments if the Russians rolled into Estonia, that's very, very serious. But I got to give him credit. Look, I could spend the next hour talking about things I don't like about this presidency or about MAGA, but I will give him some real credit on foreign policy, right? The opening to Syria, I did not anticipate that. That's pretty amazing. he's taken a practical approach in the Middle East that I think is, again, the Iranian question will play out over the next year or so, but there have been a lot of things that have surprised me in the Middle East, including, I don't know that any of us would have anticipated that whatever you think of Bibi Netanyahu, his ability to wipe out Hezbollah, Hamas, and to put the Iranians on their knees, I'm not sure any of us would have predicted that.
The catastrophic consequences of the October 7th attack for Iran and its satellites is amazing, right? From a world historical standpoint in terms of miscalculations. But now, we see today, I saw the reports just a couple hours ago about Israel hitting targets in Syria, right? So we have airstrikes going on. And it feels like, tell me how it feels, as much as you're allowed to tell us outside of a skiff, it feels like we're in a real churny period. It feels like a lot of things are being remade and reimagined than they were before. And the Overton window is so big. When you look at this, and you wouldn't be the only Democrat to point out that Trump has been able to do things vis-a-vis Israel that Joe Biden couldn't do or Barack Obama couldn't do, didn't have the political stature to do. When you look at the region and you see what's going on, what's your optimism, pessimism percentage right now?
Yeah, I think like everything else, the Middle East is pretty murky. We should be doing all we can, and again, I give the president and his administration credit for this, to build up and support the Syrian regime. The reason the Israelis are still being very kinetic in the area is that a lot of it is ungoverned space. ISIS is still very much a threat in the east. There's a lot of messy stuff in the south. If we really commit ourselves to creating a powerful central government in Damascus, that'll be good for everybody. And, ISIS will get squeezed, and that's all good. I was sort of trying to decide whether I agreed with your statement that he's accomplished things. No question that between the Israelis and the United States, we have set the Iranian program back meaningfully. Now, whether meaningfully is 6 months or 6 years is still very much open to question. And whether strategically the Iranians have now determined, on the one hand, golly, we've just got to behave ourselves because this really sucks, or golly, Pakistan, North Korea, and India got it right. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know. Look, and here's where it gets particularly murky. It really helps. Two things make the Middle East different. One, Iran finally deciding that it's going to behave themselves, either compelled to do so, and some resolution to the Palestinian issue. And I fear that we are far, far further away on that second thing than we ever have been. And it pains me to say this, but, and look, all due respect, I was in Israel in February. To go there is to feel the trauma of what occurred. But, it's not clear to me that the Prime Minister has any interest in moving in any direction towards a solution. I want to say two-state solution, but I seem to be the only person on the planet saying that anymore, that creates stability and security in that particular swath of the Middle East.
The political limitation on Presidents Biden and Obama was domestic on Israel, right? Because they had a constrained area of political movement inside the Democratic Party, right? Because you can't be too pro, or you get yelled at by folks in, let's say, Michigan, for example. And if you go too hard the other way, you lose folks in the middle, folks in your district, folks in places like that. The Democratic, we had David Hogg, who was up here earlier today, and he was on this stage. And the belief that the Democratic Party has to be wholly reinvented, right? There is this idea that says, it's time to blow it up, clean house, start over. Zoran Mamdani, I will get it right eventually, Zoran Mamdani and others, and that it's time for wholesale revolutionary change inside the Democratic Party. And then I watch Arizona has a special primary election, and your former colleague's daughter wins in a walk and goes in. Analyze for us, put your party on the couch just for a second and talk about what you see happening inside the Democratic Party and the tensions between these wings.
Yeah, and look, no, we don't strip it for parts yet. By the way, if we can't take the House majority in 2026, if the people in the room who know politics know what happens typically, tectonically speaking, in a first midterm of a president. My class was wiped out in 2010. I'm class of '08. We were wiped out in 2010. It just always happens.
Yeah.
If the Democratic Party can't take a House majority, that would be what, winning 6 seats or something? If we can't do that, then strip it for parts. And by the way, I'll be there helping strip it for parts because we've gotten something really wrong. I just don't think that that's the case. Now, there's 2 parties in this country of 350 million people, right? So yes, it is a little uncomfortable that, my party includes, I guess, Kirsten Sinema and Mamdani or whatever.
Yeah.
But look at the other party. The other party includes Chip Roy and David Valadao and Fitzpatrick, who was the only Republican who had the courage to vote against the big, beautiful bill. So anyway, we got 2 parties who are going to cram an awful lot of people into it. And you can say Mamdani, New York is a pretty special place, right?
Right.
New York gave us AOC, young people in New York. You can over-index on this. My theory on Mamdani is, A, he was up against Andrew Cuomo. B, for God's sake, he talked authentically about what people cared about, really cared about, felt, right? Affordability. Try being a 30-year-old on a $75,000 a year salary living in New York City. Now, by the way, I don't think those 30-year-olds are dumb. I think they know that municipally owned grocery stores probably isn't the answer. They probably know that rent ceilings are probably in the long run not the solution. But what they're saying is, daggone it, Cuomo's talking about saving democracy and going up against Donald Trump. And here's this young guy talking about the stuff that I think about 24/7. And they'll excuse him having sort of out of bounds ideas just because he's focused on them. And okay, Mamdani, you pointed out in Arizona. What about Abigail Spanberger in Virginia?
Right.
What about Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey? So it's not like, you've got these tensions. And yes, in New York, when you go up against Andrew Cuomo, there's going to be an opening for somebody who really galvanizes the progressive base.
And this is the seriously but not literally thing where people want to hear something that connects with them. They're not going to worry about every single thing that the person says, but they're going to feel the vibe.
You just, politics is simpler than it looks, right? Why we couldn't, here's my bill of indictment. Why we couldn't say, yeah, it really sucks that chicken is $12 a pound. Instead, we had, well, this is a transitory effect caused by supply and demand. People are like, we hate you. We hate you. Just speaking authentically, clearly. Look, if you can't even, it's a terrible mistake in politics. I have no idea why the President Biden and then subsequent presidential candidate Harris couldn't do this, which is to say, yes, this really sucks. I feel you. I feel you. I may not even have the solution, but I feel you. If you don't even feel somebody, you're done in politics. And look, Mamdani, he may have been crazy on a lot of his policy proposals, but people looked at him and he said, damn it, he gets me.
Yeah, and he talks like people talk.
Yeah, authentic.
Like people talk. Well, there was a good dose of authenticity for you. All right, if you knew which was the good side of Greenwich, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Jim Himes. Please give him a big round of applause.